Welcome back. Sorry for starting a couple of minutes late. Did you all get sorted with your assignments? I saw them dropping in yesterday, so that was really fun. Some late in the night. I saw some pulling a later night, so that's good. Anybody who did not manage to submit it, just for sort of technical reasons or other priorities?
Technical.
Okay. Yeah. Then we can look at that. Yeah. Then that can be solved. Yes.
I also had some issues with Illustrator. I think I need to manage some stuff.
Yeah. But that's why we're here.
I practiced a lot.
Yeah.
I did not submit something that was fast.
So that will be a good time for you to ask questions, specific ones, and we can look at things that you have issues with as well. So some of that can come tomorrow, and when we'll have good time. Anything else that you feel you would want to get covered? I mean, we will get into details and you will be able to ask questions all along the way. But so we'll see if I cover some of the things today, and otherwise we'll discuss them tomorrow. We'll also, while we're discussing the assignments, we will look through some special things that people have managed to do and not managed to do. So then we'll do a little bit of both. So we'll show the images, and this cable is not so good. So I'll show you the assignments, and then I'll show you how to solve some of these things a little bit in another way. But today we'll start in one theme, and that is publications. So of course our goal is to publish. That's of course one of the main things we do, is to try to get our message out. Either if it is in our original papers or if it is review articles, PhD thesis. Of course, there are a couple of you who are going to write. And so many of these things have one common theme, and that is that you need in one way to communicate your illustrations to somebody else. And this somebody else then needs to be able to take your image without you sitting there all the time and reproduce this. Either it's in digital form or it's in a printed form. And so you need to have steps along the way to make sure that your vision and what you see on your screen is actually what turns out to be on that paper in the end. And this is not a very straightforward process. And the more steps there are in this process, the more risk there is for errors. And what errors can there be? Well, there are a lot of different things that can turn out in the end that were not what you expected them to be. So there are things that come to color, for example. We discussed CMYK, RGB color, and how that can dramatically change your images. So that's one issue, that you may have one color space going into another one. But then there are more subtle differences that comes to calibration of your screen, for example, that you may have when you're sitting taking your confocal images. You sit in a pitch black room and watching this screen that is well lit from behind. But then when you try to print that in a paper, and the same thing will turn out very dim, because you're looking at this from printed dies on top of each other and then on a paper in a completely different lighting. So you need to be able to understand how that flow goes as well. But then we come into more technical things when we work with illustrations. So the more complex our illustrations are, the more risk there is that there will be changes along the way with file formats. So for example, if you use a font that is very unique for you and you don't make sure that that flows the right way, there may be a symbol that is not transferred to the paper. So instead of having your alpha in alpha-synuclein, it just says an A, or in some cases it changes to the Apple symbol. And that can be quite annoying if you see Apple-synuclein. Is maybe not what you wanted to say in that image. So there are many of these things that we need to understand and minimize the risks. And one way people have done is, of course, to rasterize your images and make them into TIFF images. But I'll show you why this is a really bad idea and why this can really be low quality in the end. But there's a reason why people do it. I would say there are three reasons. One is because they don't understand the implications of doing it, so you do it just by habit and you read that TIFF is one of the supported formats you can supply. The other one is because you can actually see everything looks the same way all the time. So the risk of things changes in the image will reduce. And then I had a third reason why I thought people do it, which I forgot. There are probably more reasons for doing it, but it is actually a very bad idea. So we want to make sure that we have the workflow with our vector images all from the start to the end. And this is what I'm going to talk about today, how you actually do it in practice. And there are some sort of key things that you can learn how to make this workflow good and how you can do what we call soft proofing. So you can, all along the way, look at what comes out and seeing that in another software and seeing, yeah, it looks still fine. So it will be okay when they get it as well. So, and this can be the same thing regardless of if you're sending an image to a coworker to include in their grant application, or if you're submitting it to a journal, or if you're printing your thesis. It's the same philosophy behind all of this. But there are some differences when it comes to submitting first time for review in a paper and the final for publication. And these things I also want to go through a little bit. So that is the first theme that we're going to do, is to prepare an illustration and a montage for journal submission. The second thing today we're going to touch on is how we take the same images and put them into our presentations. Because that's another thing. We want to make sure that what we do is fully transferable into the software's Keynote and PowerPoint. So I'm going to talk a little bit around those two, and a little bit on how you work with the PowerPoint file format to make sure that you can manage to get in your vector graphics into your PowerPoint as well. And for this part, we only now have 45 minutes. And I think it should still be fine, because I think it's better to have this a little bit briefer now. You can go back to the videos and see some of the details will come up that you will probably want to go back to. And then we can have discussions around that tomorrow as well. And then we will have Jenny Wallace. She will then be talking to you until lunch with a coffee break in the middle. And as you may have read, she is working now full-time as an art editor. Is that the correct title? Art and layout editor for Nature Reviews Neuroscience. So she'll give you her perspective from the other side, if we want to call it like that. So let's get started a little bit around the discussions on how we get from our InDesign pictures and our Illustrator pictures to a place where we can submit them. And Illustrator is a little bit easier than InDesign. So in my view, InDesign is the start. You have Illustrator in between, and you have submission in the end. So we'll start with InDesign. And why is InDesign trickier than Illustrator to submit correctly? And it has to do with this mix of multiple inputs. So now when you have been working with InDesign, you know that InDesign is the sort of center point, the hub, and you have all of these links out. So you have links to Illustrator, you have links to InDesign, you have links to Photoshop files, you have links to text. Everything else is scattered around on your computer. They are not collected in the InDesign file. So you may work with gigabytes of photos, and then still your InDesign file is super tiny. So you realize that you cannot just take that InDesign file and move it somewhere else, because it doesn't contain all of your information. So we have two parts where we need to consider here. One is, what is linked to this file, and how do we get that all together? And there's a great tool in InDesign how to bring all your files together that I wanted to start showing you first. And this tool is developed for you to be able to take everything that you have brought in and take the correct versions of all the files and bring them together in one folder. So I'm going to start in here, and yes, absolutely. Let's see, we have, that should be not the curtains, the light. It should be. Is that okay? No. So this is the montage that we generated last time, as you may remember. So we have some vector graphics here that we took from qPCR. This was the export from SPSS. And then we made this montage of different panels. And as you remember, all of this is just links to all of these original files. So we may have gone in and changed some brightness or other things in those files, but it's just a link to those original files in here. And now we may not remember which version or from which animal was this one and another one from this, and which file was that. So that is quite a tedious work to try collect it manually yourself. So what InDesign has done is to make what's called a package. So when you go into File, you see that there's a command called package. And what this package does is that it analyzes everything in your file, and it gives you first a warning if not everything is correct. And nowadays, you will often see warnings there. And a warning doesn't mean that there's a problem, because a warning is built from the old tradition of having color-separated images in CMYK, for example. But nowadays, when we want to work with RGB for our fluorescence, you will see that it's warning us because we have 9 images that are using RGB color space. So let me just turn on one thing that I realize I need to do on this computer, and that is the zoom. So, because now I should be able to zoom in for you. So this is how it looks here, that we have 13 linked files into this. So, and all of them are found, because that can be one thing, that you may have put in a file, but then deleted the original. And then it will say that one of these originals are not found anymore. And then you need to actually replace it or find another one or relink this file. There may also be files that you have edited outside InDesign but not updated the preview in InDesign. And then there will be said that they are modified here. So the missing or inaccessible ones and modified here, you need to really sort of take yourself and adjust this and correct that error. But then you have images, and here is what the warning comes. It says that I have 9 files that use RGB color space. And just for, as I said, the traditional printing presses, you want to maintain that as CMYK. But in our case, we want this in RGB. So we're very happy with this result. So we can continue. The other thing you have in this package is that you can actually also use it to collect your fonts together. So this is the other thing we discussed, that one issue with all of these things is that the recipient of your files may not have your fonts. So this is good if you're working with an InDesign file with your colleague and you want to sort of ship this back and forward, or want to have that colleague to be able to continue editing your InDesign file. Then you want to make sure that you package in the fonts as well. So if that person doesn't have the fonts that you used, they can install them and edit. Of course, we always need to know then that fonts are just as with software, that there's a license issues around them. So you need to take a little bit of care when shipping this back and forth. But it's a nice possibility to be able to also put all of those files, font files, in the same folder. So, and then it can take all of your images, and it can take the links and just move all of those files in. So you see all the files that you have in there. And there's a lot of details in here that you will not have to look at all. So you can just skip all of this. And what you need to do is to click the package. And in here, you also had all of these possibilities to write a small text file to the publisher. But in my case, I always just skip this file because it would just be a text file in with some extra information. So you can continue there. And what it then does is that it asks you to create a folder. And this folder, it takes the file name and just puts folder after it. So we'll just put this on the desktop and call this montage. And then folder. So just, I was a bit quick. I wanted to show you these things as well. So you can see that you can choose what is put into this package. So you copy fonts, you copy the linked graphics, and you can also update the graphic links in the package. So this is important because the links initially are to where the file is located. But now it updates the link to only point to the adjacent folder where all the links will be. So these two are a must. The copy fonts you can choose yourself. Most of the time you don't need to copy them because you use this only for your own sake. So when you do this and you say package, it just has showing this copyright thing for the fonts, as I discussed. And then you will see on the desktop that you now have something called well, it actually didn't change name, but that was because I went back. So the finished folder is now the package. So this package is just a normal folder, and it has your InDesign document in it. The fonts are in here. You see I have the Adobe font Myriad here. And it's made this small instructions text file. But the most important is the folder with the links. So in the links folder, it just puts all your original data files that are included in this InDesign file. So no other files, just the correct version of those files. And it makes a copy. So this is the excellent way of creating an archive of each of your folders at their final stage when they were submitted. So then you can go back to this if you want to do revisions of the image and everything else. So this is a good start when we are exporting to do all of this. So now you see these images are not very big, but they can be rather large. And there are issues with submitting a folder like this to your publisher. You could think, well, I could just zip file this and send to them, and then it would be OK. But there are many risks with this, because if they don't have the right version of InDesign and other things, there are chances that what they open up will not look identical as what you had. So that's why they wouldn't accept you to submit InDesign package folder. Although all the information is in there, when you read, you see that they want you to submit EPS files or TIFF files, for example. And then we have the PDF files normally for reviewers, submission to reviewers. And I guess we can have some discussion around the PDF format versus the other traditional formats. But I'll cover this mindset of having PDF files for review first and EPS files for submission. So submitting a PDF file is rather trivial, and you have all done that because you managed to submit your InDesign file to me as a PDF. So there's nothing else to it than those kind of things. Although we can discuss a little bit around compression algorithms and resolution in those files. So we are now at the stage where we want to generate the EPS. So now when I take this file, so I can close my original, and I open the one that is in my package folder here. So you see this file now looks identical as the original, which is what it's supposed to do. So the first thing you can look at is that in InDesign, you have an export function. And this is what we used to get the PDF out. And in the export, you see that you can change from the PDF print to an EPS file. So this sounds good. Now we have EPS. This is what they want. And we start by exporting this. So it's called montage EPS. So when we export this one, you see now that the choices you have are rather limited. You can only choose to have the RGB out here, and you can have a preview, and then we have the PostScript level 2. But you cannot actually change other things. So what part should be exported? Should we have something that is the whole page like this, or should we only have our image? And this is different between if you want to submit it out to reviewer comments or if you want to submit your final. Because for reviewers, it's actually a good thing if they have a PDF with a whole A4 or letter size, because it will not be resized after you have submitted. But when you want to submit this to the printing, you actually want it only to be this part in here. because they need to know exactly how wide your figure is so they can adjust it to the layout and get everything correctly. So the EPS export in InDesign is a little bit limited, but the main thing I find limiting in the EPS export in InDesign is that you cannot rescale images and cut them down in resolution. So you see, it will always take everything that you have in there and export it as at their full resolution. And this may be an issue if you have done the workflow we discussed to have images scaled for poster size and then bringing them down to the stamp size. These files can be really, really big. And there's also no form of compression at all in this one. So I can show you this. And of course, the main thing you need to look at here, if you are to use this export function and we have RGB in the file, it's key that you export it as the RGB and not the CMYK. Because if we take the CMYK, it will do the separation for you and you'll get the greens in this bland state as we shown before. So if we take RGB there, it should still look OK, and we say export. So now it's taking all the links, merging them in together in a single file with a .eps. And you see this one is then 20.9 megabytes large. So it's not overly huge, and it is the sum of all the images that are inside. But then how do we actually look at this file? How do we see that this file is looking OK? So in Windows, you have one option, and in Mac OS, you have two options. So we'll start with the one that works in both. And that's actually to start Acrobat Pro. So in Acrobat Pro, you can choose to create a PDF. So this sounds a bit counterintuitive. Why do I want to do a PDF out of an EPS file? But it actually is a very simple way to do this, what I call soft proofing, that you see on the screen. And the PDF is the easiest way to visualize this outside the software where you created the file. Because you don't want to open the file inside the software you created it in again. Then you're not checking for anything. Then it's just opening the file itself created. You want to go to another software. And doing this with the Acrobat is one way. And then we can open the file, EPS file I created, and we say open here. And you see that this file is actually looking rather OK. You have everything in there, and you will see that you have your text is looking good. We have our GFP is looking reasonably high resolution, but actually not on that screen. That was puzzling. So it is actually not that good. So the EPS from InDesign here doesn't show its best side, because you see your files are low resolution here. And I think that must have been a checkbox that I forgot. So this is exactly why you want to see your soft proofing. So let's go back to InDesign, see if I can actually troubleshoot this one. So we go back to our EPS, and we call it version 2. And then we want to see where. Interesting, because it says send image data all, and it has all the files in. All right, so let's see if we can correct this through the other way of exporting EPS, which is the version that has one more step, but it gives you more control over the size of your images that are included. Yes?
When we were working in design, the resolution was normal, but we could change it, change the display.
Yes, so that's only valid when you view the file inside InDesign.
So as soon as you export it, it's going to be exported as high quality.
Exactly.
You don't have to change
You don't have to change
it.
that. So just to recap to everybody, we have this called display performance, where you have a typical display or you have a high quality display. I'm wondering why, see here, these files look like high quality anyway. it's actually not the best files to show that because they are included here as they still look rather okay. In this case, they look fine because they are low resolution. But we normally work with a typical display showing a proxy of the image. So not showing the whole image inside the InDesign. But once you export it, you always get the full resolution out. Well, you should, but you didn't in this EPS file. And that's key to see that early so you can correct for it. So just so I don't lose that thought on previewing EPS files. So you can do that by creating a PDF file within Acrobat, or on the Mac, you can just right-click on the file and you say Open with Preview. So Preview does the same thing, that it generates a PDF out of your EPS file. And then we can see the same file there. And the interesting thing is that the same file exported and previewed in Preview actually shows you the high-resolution images. So there is some kind of discrepancy in how these, let's see if I can show you that side by side. So this is the file generated in Acrobat. And it looks like so. And this is the same one in Preview. So you see, although the original EPS was the same, these two software, when they interpret that file, they interpret it very differently. And so that's a peculiarity, especially because Acrobat and InDesign are Adobe products. So you would expect that these would be fully compatible in between. And it's actually the first time I saw this. I tried that last night, and it did not look that bad that time. But now we have a good opportunity here to actually see if we can make something that is looking equally well on both of these. So you see, there's no issue with the text. All of the text looks perfect and well. But when you open it there, it doesn't look good. And here it looks perfectly fine. So the other step we have around this is to start off with the intermediate file. And the intermediate file I generate when I do this to submit everything is a full resolution PDF file. So what you do instead in InDesign is to go to File, Export, and a PDF for print. And why I do this PDF for print is because I want to get at this dialog, the one that you used for exporting to the file that you submitted to me yesterday. And in this file, we can go into the compression. And here, we can say that we want to downsample every image to 300 dots per inch. So you know that all of that extra data that you had in the file, you can get rid of that here. And so we can set this to have getting to 300 dots per inch of all the files and have no compression. So when we do that, we generate a very large PDF file that has all the information but no extra information. So all of this is just the size that is needed to print this in perfect size in the journal. And you don't have any extra size or data in it. For example, outside all of these squares. So you remember these photos were actually oblong and not square. So we have cut away some image data out there that nobody would be happy with. And doing this way, it actually crops to all of these masks. So we have a file that looks perfect in this PDF. And the advantage with having it as a PDF is that Illustrator is working natively with the PDF files. So we can now take this file and bring it into Illustrator. And this is something that you often see in Illustrator, that it asks you that, how should I interpret this file? There are things in this file that has RGB color space, and some of the things in it have CMYK. And this could be so because you have some color of lettering that may be CMYK while the image is RGB. So you need to know what is the main important data in your image. Is it RGB or is it CMYK? And that is the part that is determining which one you check in here. And here, of course, we're using the fluorescence images, so we have the RGB. So once you get that in there, we now have the file looking exactly the same. So the file is just open in Illustrator. We have the possibility to go in and edit. And now we want to do one thing. And that is getting rid of this dependency to your specific fonts. Because the EPS file does not contain any font information. It just has a reference to which type should be included in the file. So if you only submit that EPS file and not the fonts that you want to use, then you may get this issue with special characters and things moving around inside your illustration that will not look well. But fortunately, there's a simple tool that you can use to get rid of all of these problems. So what I do is to go to Edit, and I say, I was going to select all. It is in a special menu, of course. Select all. So I select everything that is in here. And then in the type, you have one that's called Create Outlines. So what does this mean? Let me just zoom in before I do it, and I hope you will be able to see what I mean. So this in here, you go Type, Create Outlines. And you see that all of the type now is not described with a line below, but by the points that make up every letter. So this makes this file impossible to, well, not impossible, but impractical to edit the text in. Because all of this text, you cannot go in with the type tool and change lettering, but it is actually small graphic objects. But what it means is that the person opening this or printing this does not need to have your fonts. So this is totally font independent. It means that what you see here will be what will be printed in the end as well. So that's the absolutely safest thing, especially for things inside illustrations like this that are parts of a special typeset or have been rotated or placed to be sort of on a millimeter accuracy. You want to make sure that you can predict where they will come in the end. Yeah.
Just the rationale behind all this step. I
Yeah.
lost you after you did the print PDF
Yeah.
thing. Why?
So the rationale is like this, that you cannot do this step in design.
No, but why are we doing this? I lost you before that, I think.
Yeah.
Why are we?
So we are doing this to be able to submit a file to a journal or a print where everything will come out exactly as you see on your screen. That is the key rationale for doing this. So you want to make sure that it's not dependent on your software version, your fonts, or how your screen shows things. You want to get rid of as many of these factors and bring it down to one absolute minimum. And this is why you do this step. To make sure that all of this in this file is the best quality possible, but still can be printed without having any of that software.
So when I did it, like the resolution of my dollars, but are they
So in this one, they are perfectly fine. And that has to do with my settings in InDesign. So when you exported it here, it has to do with, sorry, let me just make a new version, version 3. When your compression here is, so when you go into compression, you can set your resolution. So you can either choose there to not downsample at all, then it just keeps all your image data. So it becomes the same thing as you're exporting the EPS. So that is fine if you have files that are just slightly larger than the 300 dots per inch, or you really don't care how large that end file will be. Then you can use not downsample. But the thing you may, there are very few reasons why you would not want to have this is the crop image data to the frames. So when we have masked them, you want to not send them all that extra data that is outside the masks. So that one is very useful. But here you can always choose do not downscale. So why do we need to go to Illustrator? Why can I not do this create outlines in InDesign? Because it sounds convoluted why I need to go from one software into the other one. And it has to do with that everything comes from so many sources that you have. So the files down here are not created in InDesign. InDesign cannot do all of these things. They are done in Illustrator. So if I was going to select everything in here, and I can do that as well. So I can select, if we go out here, and there it is actually under Edit, select all. So you see this thing with all of the software in Creative Suite is almost the same, but there are small differences in how you select this. And in here, you need to ungroup everything, so it also works a little bit differently there. And you can go to Type, and we should be able to create outlines. So you see that then InDesign is creating outlines on everything that InDesign understands and knows about. But it doesn't do it inside these images. So where it is most important, InDesign cannot reach. So this is why you need that extra step to export it as a PDF, get it into Illustrator, which can see everything. So in Illustrator, it brings all of these links in, and it can then start to adjust them. And so it is a sort of necessary evil to have to do this, to really catch all of these small things in the end. And once you have that, now we can again export this as an EPS file. And in Illustrator, just to make things similar but not identical, when you want to save something as an EPS file, you don't export as an EPS file. You actually save as. So this is not, again, not the same in both of them. So you find it instead in Save As. And I see the format, I choose Illustrator EPS. So then we have a slightly different dialog box again. And in this dialog box, there is one possible pitfall, which is not sounding that obvious from the start. And it is this one, include CMYK postscript in RGB files. And that sounds okay because, well, I have my RGB confocal images, so CMYK should just be included in that file as well. But that's not what's happening. So if I save it like this and choose OK, we have now generated a new EPS file that is down here. And I'll open this in preview and hope I can show that on the screen. So you see two things. The first one is, if I zoom out, that it has cropped it now to your art area. So only the part where your figure really is. And this is nice because you can then, you know the boundaries and all looks perfectly fine. And you don't see that you have some extra type sitting out. You may have a white lettering that you have put in that may be out here. And then it will extend with a white area. And you know you have made something wrong you need to clean up. But you see clearly that the colors are now messed up. So if I try to compare this one to the EPS that I exported. See if these turn up well. So when you come from this one and you get that one, you're not that happy. So this is clearly the issue you want to avoid. And that is just this checkbox in Illustrator. So when you go back to Illustrator and you save as EPS, and we just save this as version 3, and you want to uncheck that include CMYK in this one, and you say OK. We'll go to the desktop, and I'll take my version 3. Now you see that you have all of it looking the way you want. So you have all of that RGB data still retained in it. all of the text, although it has been created at outlines, it still looks the same as the font. There's no visible difference between your outlines and fonts.
So at what step did you remove the white outline there?
So that is done in Illustrator. So Illustrator does this when it creates an EPS file. Because as you may remember from the talk on Monday, the EPS is this postscript, but without descriptions on how the page looks and where it should be placed. While PDF is then having also the page information. But it doesn't mean that Illustrator cannot generate that one in the same way as the EPS was generated in InDesign. And there's just a small checkbox to get that version as well. So if we save as EPS, now we can have version 4, you can say use artboards here. So when you do that, it says that it wants to actually include all the white space as well in your EPS file. And then I'll make sure everything else is the same. And for that, you then see that you have two different versions of your EPS. One is having the whole artboard as well. So you can still get that one out, and it's just this checkbox in. But normally when you submit the final submission, it's the better way to have it just where the pictures are themselves. So I know this is a little bit of a convoluted two-step thing, but it is to make sure that we get away from all of this embedded type. And that's especially important when we import PDFs from different measurement equipment, our fax machines or flow cytometers and other qPCRs or wherever we get our data, but also in SPSS. They use their very specific fonts that are not generally available for the whole operating system. They're just available for that software. So you want to make sure that you can get away from all of this. So why am I pushing all of these things so much? Why not generate a TIFF file? And I just wanted to show you a little bit to understand what the implications are when you publish this. So let's see if I can show you some example papers. And so these are two papers that were published this year. I actually have one from Eric, who is here, although he has done a very good job in his submission. So I wanted to compare these two papers. And when you look at them scaled out like this, they both look reasonably okay. But when you start to zoom into one of these, you start to see clearly that all of the text becomes soft, and all the borders become soft here. And why is this? Well, it is because we all need to be able to download the PDF files rather quickly. So they have to use a lot of compression in the files. And one way you compress a file is to reduce the resolution. So this text cannot be 600 dots per inch or something like that that would really be required to show all of this text sharply in a pixel-based image. So it is all of the text here is embedded with the photos in a single TIFF file. While in the other file here, when we zoom into one of these, you can, let's see here. You see that it's all of the image resolution is the same. The images are not higher resolution because this is the thing of a PDF. But everything else looks crystal clear, the text and everything else in there. So this is really the difference between having something submitted in the right way and the wrong way. That it all looks better, although actually the file size of the left one is much smaller than the right one, because it can be compressed more efficiently. You have more efficient data in it. So the end product will always look so much nicer if you can submit it in vector-based graphics than it is in a pixel-based. So it's worthwhile going through those extra steps. But just when you do it, make sure that you do soft proofing in either the preview or or in Acrobat. So let's just check if the last version actually was generated correctly in, or is rasterized correctly in Acrobat also, because otherwise that would be an interesting dilemma. It is actually not showing them well. Okay, that will be a take-home work for me to figure out why Acrobat is not rasterizing these EPS files correctly. It normally should do it, but it could be in my version here. So I'll send you out a note on that. But for Mac users, use the preview. And in Windows, you will have to check if this issue exists there as well. Did we have a question around that?
So I previously used the OCR function in Adobe when you are taking in documents.
Mm-hmm.
Does Illustrator have the same, or you have to go? Because I can see in your graph here
Mm-hmm.
the text that you put angle.
Mm-hmm.
That's you probably added that after you generated the graph, right?
Yes.
The axis.
Mm-hmm.
Text is not font.
Yes, so this is after I created outlines. So I have destroyed the font myself. So
It didn't even recognize the font on the
yes, that is another thing that I'll show you this afternoon, how to do it when your software has its own special font inside that cannot be brought into Illustrator. And what you normally see then are boxes with crosses over or something else, or just looks like scrambled text. So I'll show you how to recover that text, because this is recovered text. I have not replaced it. These are the letterings that were in there, but I recover them through a special procedure. So we can get back to that. So that was the sort of tips on how to get this into the EPS file for submission. And so key take-home messages is if you have fluorescence, maintain them as RGB and make sure that they are kept as RGB when you export them. And if you have a lot of text in them, make sure that it's outlined. And then you can go either way, either directly from the InDesign, directly from Illustrator, or this version via Illustrator to make sure if you have a mixed montage that you get everything with outlines in it. So those were the main things. And now we have around about 5-6 minutes to talk about bringing them into presentations. And bringing things into presentations may be super easy or a little bit more complex. But where we'll start in Keynote, which is the one that I use, is super easy. Because in Keynote, when we go back to Illustrator, and I'll say open the recent file, this one. The first and absolutely easiest way you can do is just to select the parts you want to generate a figure from. So say these guys here, and I just copy them and I paste them into my Keynote. So in a new one, and I paste them in, and they look tiny, but of course, because it's vector-based graphics, I can just pull them up and scale them to be correctly. So that version works very well, and it will give you the perfect quality of those files being scalable. And they also have transparencies, and everything is correct there. You can do the same thing with any type of PDF file. So if you have this file as a PDF, you can either just drag the whole thing in, and you'll get the whole PDF file in there. And that also looks perfectly OK, but you get, of course, the page outlines, which make it a bit more cumbersome to scale up. But all the data is there the same way. So all of that, you can make it look well, and you can place it through. So in Keynote, any Illustrator or PDF file can be directly used. And you can also just copy-paste actually from both Illustrator and InDesign. So Keynote on the Mac, there just isn't any issue because you can do all of these things and it just works. In PowerPoint, things are a little bit more muddy. And there is one thing that is giving you the problems. And this is the discrepancy between PowerPoint PPT files and PPTX files. So in the old PPT files, there was no support for PDF format or vector graphics at all. So you cannot bring it in and having the scalable option. In the newer software versions, you can bring in PDFs. So in the version of PowerPoint here, which is the 2011 for Mac OS, you can see that you can do the same thing as I did in the Keynote. I can take one of these, copy it, and paste it in. No, sorry, that did not copy. Let's see what happened there. Copy. Interesting. Right, I thought it actually worked. I tested that yesterday. Let's see if we can paste. No, it did not work. Right, so why does this not work? I am not a PowerPoint guy, as you may realize, because I can't even get rid of this one.
How will you make it paste special?
Was it paste special?
I think so.
Okay, pasted that PDF. Yep, it actually worked for me yesterday. But okay, so when you paste it as a PDF, then you get the vectors looking okay. And so that's perfectly fine, but as soon as you would, yes. So you see this it's looking equally well there. But if you would save this as a PPT file and open it again, it is low resolution and it has lost the capacity to rescale this. So that is the main thing you need to remember when working with PowerPoints, that you want to insert this as PDF files and save them as PPTX. And if you do that, you retain the quality all through with the scalability and having the backgrounds transparent and everything else like that. So then what happens if you really need this to be the old version of PowerPoint? Because sometimes you are presenting in a place where you don't know what versions they have. So you have two options. One is actually to let PowerPoint create those low resolution versions. And that is okay, but it will be lower quality than if you preempt it and export it as a rasterized image. So this is the only scenario, I think, where you need to consider actually rasterizing and making it into a file that may be suitable for PowerPoint. And that part is done in Illustrator, and you have it in two ways. You can either choose to save it for Microsoft Office. And that's a strange wording for something. It says, why wouldn't this always be the best? And this is, I don't know why they call it Save for Microsoft Office, because in the PDF version, it is much higher quality. And when you print it, it looks good. And you can also do that in Word to have PDFs inside. So I would not consider this being the Save for Microsoft Office, except for the really old versions. And you see then that it saves this as a PNG file. And if you remember from our discussion on file formats, PNG is one of those pixel-based file formats. So it is making these into pixels. And I can save this one out on the desktop again. So now we have generated a PNG. And this PNG looks exactly like the layout should be, but it is rasterized. So when you go in like this, you see that all of the text is pixels. So it's generating a PNG that is okay for showing the whole image. But it really is one of those things that is a trade-off. So you don't want to use this if you don't really have to. And nowadays, PPTX files are supported in so many places that I would really go for those. And in the cases they say actively that you cannot use it, then you need to do these other things. But keep PPTX files and work with PDFs inside PowerPoint as well, and you should be fine. All right, so I think we are on